Hi, class. Okay, so today we get to talk about religion. Like I said, we will talk about a lot of things that are kind of taboo to talk about in our culture, and religion is definitely one of them. So, um, anthropology and studying of religion, it can be slightly different from your previous experiences with religion. Um, At the beginning of the semester, we started with an individual and the community, and then we worked up to the larger picture. Thus, anthropology is less interested in big religions and their tenets and faith, the beliefs in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hindu, and so on, although we do study those as well. But we're also looking at their day-to-day practices of religion and how it impacts people's lives. So we're not really interested in the questions of ultimate truth or falsity of any religion, but we're more worried about how it impacts people. Um, the ultimate truth of religion doesn't matter because for the believer, a religion is ultimately true, whether we choose to agree with them or not. So one way in which religion fascinates anthropologists is through the connection to power. As we've seen throughout the semester, systems of power are pervasive throughout human cultures. They interact with everything from economics to politics, race, gender, and of course, religion. While Pope Francis has no direct power over the United States government, his address to Congress shows how religion, nevertheless, is extremely powerfully influenced on people and their daily lives. It is one of the primary sources we use to define morality. It takes daily activities in the form of worship and ritual. It often informs what we think of as a proper and moral life. Um, and we're going to try to explore a little bit of the role of religion and power as we go on. So it's important to remember from the beginning that religious systems have a great deal of power in most cultures around the world. Next slide. So, our big questions, what we're trying to learn is what is religion? What tools do anthropologists use to understand how religion works? In what ways is religion both a system of meaning and a system of power? And how is globalization changing religion? So let's see if we actually answer this question. What is religion? Religions and religious expressions are extremely diverse around the world. While they have some things in common, it is often seen easier to identify their differences rather than their similarities. As a result, coming up with definition for religion is extremely difficult. At the same time, you all have an intrinsic idea of what I mean by the term religion, right? Let's step back and look at how anthropologists have attempted to define religion. So, as I said earlier, anthropologists are less interested in the specific doctrines found in any religion than they are with how religions affect people and their lives. Thus, anthropologists approach religion from the perspective of practice. That's what does it mean to practice a religion, rather than necessarily adhering to or believing in a particular religion and religious traditions. From this perspective, anthropologists have identified 7 core elements to religious beliefs and practices found around the world. A belief in powers or deities whose ability transcends the natural world. An example, a belief in some form of supernatural power. Then myths and stories about the meaning and purpose of life. These myths also often cover how life originated and the roles of humans in the universe. A set of ritual activities that reinforce or instill these collective beliefs. These can include acts like private prayer, worship services, ceremonies, and so on. A symbol system used in religious practice that represents a key aspect of the religion or tenets and faith, such as the crucifix or cross in Christianity, the Star of David in Judaism, and the Star and Crescent in Islam. Identifiable specialists in religion who assist or instruct the average believers, such as priests, rabbis, and so on. Institutions that preserve, explore, teach, and implement that religion's beliefs. These can be anything from a simple countryside chapel to archives, libraries that seek to preserve a religion's history. A community of believers, as well, is the next thing. And much like we first defined culture, we said that culture requires a community. The beliefs and practices of one person represent a single isolated experience. Only when a group of people share a belief system can we call it a religion. Not every religion incorporates all 7 of these core elements. Some religions emphasize certain elements more than others, but by and large, most religions fall within this spectrum. So, a local expression and universal definitions. So, we think of religion from the large scale perspective. We tend to think of them as following a set of definitions. That is, we can divide them into distinct religions with a universal set of practices. We imagine that all Hindus follow a certain set of beliefs. All Christians subscribe to their own set of beliefs, which are different from those of the Hindus, and so on. If someone doesn't follow a set of beliefs, as we prescribe them to be, they can't be members of that religion. Thus, if someone says he or she was a Christian, but they professed a belief in Hindu concepts of reincarnation, we might say this person is not a true Christian. These broad definitions, however, are definitions that we impose on the world. They are reflections of our beliefs and not necessarily beliefs of the people that we are describing. People who profess to be Christians are Christians, at least in as much as that is how they see themselves. Therefore, if we want to understand them and their worldviews, that is how we have to approach such individuals, whether or not we believe them or not. So, when we look at the local expressions of religion, we tend to find that they do not match our broad concepts of what a particular religion should look like. This is why anthropologists are more interested in local practices rather than religious theology, scriptures, or history. We have 2 good examples to look at where local practices is directly contrary to the broader concepts of religion in question. These people still consider themselves to be practicing believers of the larger religion in question, though. Let's look at it. Muslim saint shrine. In northern India, there's a shrine to the Muslim saint Husain Turki. Husain Turki was the grandson of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm sorry if I am. He died a martyr's death. That is, he died in the name of Islam. Shrines to holy people are not uncommon in many religions, but this shrine is said to be possessed of healing powers. Pilgrims come to the shrine from all over India to seek its powers. Those suffering from illness as well as financial ruin come to the shrine seeking to be cleansed or cured by the shrine's powers. Such healing shrines are not widely accepted as real, but many followers of Islam, and some suggest they are sacrilegious. That is contrary to the Islamic doctrine. Nevertheless, the practice not only survives but thrives at this local community level. Another interesting fact about the particular shrine is it draws many non-Muslims as well, despite the fact that the shrine is specifically dedicated to the Islamic religion. Many people who self-identify as Hindu, Shia, or Jain also come to the shrine seeking its powers. This kind of blending or different religious faith is actually quite common, but it does not fit into the overarching definition of what it means to be Muslim or Hindu. Okay, what tools do anthropologists use to talk about religion? Um, so we typically talk about different theories and the way they affect subsequent generations of scholars that approach religion. So we have to work our way back to the beginning in order to understand the way in which anthropologists approach religion. So we're going to talk about my favorite, Emile Durkheim. Durkheim was a famous French sociologist who lived in the latter half of the 19th century. His work is highly influential in both sociology as well as anthropology. Remember, anthropology came from sociology, so we do use a lot of the same theorists. His work includes many famous books, including Elementary Forms of Religious Life. Durkheim thought that if he studied religions of a small and simple culture, for an example, a culture organized as a band, he could learn more about early forms of human religion. Today, this approach would be considered, or at least challenged, as being racially charged. That is, he presumed simple cultures are primitive. But Durkheim went forth and studied, picking out a group of Australian Aborigines. Well, anthropologists today would say that Durkheim did not actually get back to any original human religion. His method of analyzing religion still had a profound impact on anthropology as a discipline. In an attempt to define religion, Durkheim focused on opposing concepts of sacred and profane. By sacred, he meant those practices, people, or objects that are considered to be holy by a religion. It also is the difference between a societal religion and solitary religious activity. So the term profane was used to refer to unholy practices, people, or objects. These concepts came out of Durkheim's attempt to define religion. He stated that religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. He was using a communal definition of what is considered to be holy to define a religion. Durkheim also was the first to bring attention to the role of what he called ritual in religion. Today, we would broadly define ritual as religious practice, which is the act of practicing a religion that creates a social structure of religion. Durkheim saw the act of carrying out rituals as a powerful social tool of binding a society together, which we will talk about again, I promise. So, religion and ritual. Following Durkheim's lead, many anthropologists have focused on the study of rituals. As religions are full of rituals and practices, this has been a very rich field of study. If this is a field you is it this is a field you should be familiar with yourself. And rites of passage are a new stage in spiritual progress. They are often associated with major life events such as adolescence, marriage, death, birth. So, pilgrim is the visiting of a holy shrine. So, pilgrimages are kind of an interesting thing to study as well. There are also food prohibitions that are part of religion. Anthropologist Mary Douglas studied a ritual in certain African cultures as well as Judaism, and she wrote about the abominations of Leviticus. She proposed that food prohibitions in religion were less about the food and more about the act of carrying out the religious ritual. People who choose to abstain from certain foods mark themselves as members of a religious community. Their act of abstaining from that food group serves as a personal reminder of their religious faith. So, Karl Marx, we get to talk about him again. So, we last talked about Marx's theories when we were discussing theories of class and inequality. Marx was particularly interested in the division between the proletariat, or remember the workers, and the bourgeoisie, those who owned the means of production. Marx viewed religion within the framework of his larger views of economy and society. He felt that not only the economy but also the cultural institutions arose from what he termed the base or the infrastructure. For Marx, the term infrastructure referred to economic realities of the world in which people lived. For example, the kinds of environment people lived in dictated the type of plants that they could grow for food. The environment either did or did not have a rich natural resource, such as coal or iron or clean water. All of these natural features represented an underlying infrastructure on which cultural institutions could be built. Thus, Marx viewed the economy between the proletariats and the bourgeoisie as fundamentally built upon the natural infrastructures. Workers did not have access to the raw materials. The bourgeoisie did. Noting that religiosity, the level of devotion to one's religion, tended to be higher among the proletariats than among the bourgeoisie, Marx viewed religion as a response to that infrastructure. So, that is, the infrastructure made the proletariats poor and defenseless, thus they needed religion as a balm to soothe their rough lives. Marx, however, phrased this more bluntly when he said religion is the opiate of the masses. So in the 19th century, opium was a very common painkiller as well as an illicit drug. Marx said that religion was used to dull the pain of life among the proletariat. He wasn't very religious. So, religion and cultural materialisms. Marx's views on religion were particularly influenced by a famous anthropologist, Marvin Harris. In his book, Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witchcraft and Witches, Harris explores Marx's ideas that the infrastructure creates social institutions. That is, your environment affects the way in which your culture develops. Harris used the idea to ask specific questions about religion. For example, why are cows sacred in Hinduism? Hindus practice vegetarianism as part of their religious rituals in general, holding that it is profane to eat meat. But in particular, they elevate cows to a sacred status. Even in times of great famine, cows are found to be wandering through Hindu villages without hindrance, despite the fact that they could be a simple and easy food source that could save the families from starvation. Harris asked, how could religious prescription be so strong to let a family starve? Sticking with an infrastructure style argument, Harris looked at the economic value of a cow. In the short term, a cow could be eaten as food. There's a specific food value involved. But once eaten, the cow's gone and can't provide any more for a family. A living cow, however, can give birth to more cows, which can be used as beasts of burden. Harris noticed that ox that worked the engine in Indian agriculture. Farmers use oxen to plow their fields for planting, to haul carts of food during harvest time, and to haul goods to markets and trade. A farmer without a living oxen was at a considerable disadvantage. So living cows also produce manure, which can be a powerful fertilizer for agricultural fields. Again, if farmers have no cows, they can't fertilize their fields. So, what Harrison is suggesting is that the prohibition against eating cows came about based on an analysis of related economic benefits to these cows. A cow could be eaten in the short term, but leave the family hungry next week. Whereas a cow maintained alive, they could use to plow and fertilize the fields and thus keep a family and food year-round. Harris's approach to culture became known as cultural materialism. Those anthropologists who favored cultural materialism suggest that infrastructure or based environment dictates cultural decisions. Okay, Weber. He's German, so this is a V, not a W. So, Max Weber wrote the Protestant Ethic and Secularization. So we've talked about Weber before, but he was an influential economic scholar who gave us the idea of prestige and life chances when we were talking about class and inequality. In discussing class and inequality, Weber largely reinforced the idea that had been previously forwarded by Karl Marx. But when we look at religion, Weber held very different ideas from Marx. Where Marx saw religion as a creation of the infrastructure and economy, Weber held that religion itself could be a powerful influence on the economy. He came to his views on religion via his analysis of the European economy. Specifically, he was interested in the rise and development of capitalism in 19th century Europe. His analysis found that rudimentary forms of capitalism had developed in many parts of the world centuries before they had appeared in Europe. But in each of these cases, those first stages of capitalism had not developed into a complex system that was found in Europe. And seeking to answer why this was the case, he turned to religion. In his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber argued that it was the European religion that allowed capitalism to thrive. Specifically, he identified strong working ethics and the high value placed on thrift, as well as discipline among Protestant religious groups. To be part of that reason, he felt that the values of work and restraint were a perfect flowing ground for complex capitalism. However, he worried that the success of capitalism would increase the rate of cultural secularism, or the abandonment of religion, which would end the world, um, oh, which in the end would undermine the success of capitalism itself. At least in the case of Europe, the first part of Weber's predictions seem to have come true. Rates of religious belief in Europe are at a record lows and continue to decline. Religious belief in the United States is also in decline, but compared to Europe and other industrialized core nations, the United States has an incredibly high rate of religiosity. Whether an abandonment of religious faith will lead to the downfall of capitalism, only time will tell. So, shamanism. Weber also studied shamanism. So, he proposed that there are three phases of development in world religion. The first phase represents the traditional religious based on magic and led by shamans. The second phase saw in the rise of charismatic religious based on a persuasive prophet such as Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses. The third and final phase of religion was a development of rational religion based on legal codes, bureaucracy structures, and formally trained leaders. Today, Weber's typology no longer has much influence, but his work represents the origin of anthropological interest in shamanism, which is one of the most heavily researched subjects in modern anthropology. I have a friend who studies the shamanistic traditions of a tribe in South America. So it's pretty popular. Shamanism represents one of the simplest forms of religion found on the planet. And by simple, we mean that there's no hierarchical status. And so it's not that the religion and the beliefs are simple itself, it's that it doesn't have a hierarchy within the system. Relatively few people are involved as religious specialists. There's a great deal of fluidity in the beliefs and religious power. Shamanistic religions are focused around individual religious practitioners known as shamans. In academic terms, shamans are part-time religious practitioners. That is to say, it's not their full-time job. They still usually have to provide for their substance by other means. Shamans have a special personal connection with the supernatural powers or beings, and this ability is typically activated through a shamanistic trance. Trances are created by a variety of different things, including meditation and fasting, and on occasion, ingestion of various types of substances, sometimes hallucinogenic. In trance, shamans can petition the supernatural powers to benefit their people. The process of becoming a shaman also has a great interest to anthropology, because shamanism is predominantly found in simple cultures resembling bands or tribes. In these cultures, social status has to be achieved rather than inherited or bestowed. And as a result, in order to become a shaman, you must achieve your standing by personal trial. Shamans typically undergo a variety of initial rites or trials. If during the course of the trial they are able to make contact with the divinity or the divine, they can become a shaman. It is also just as likely that an individual will fail the initiation rite. Different varieties of shaman have been observed in countless cultures around the world, and they are still studied to this day. So, religion and magic. If we're going to talk about religion and supernatural beliefs, we need to talk about magic. Concepts of magic vary wildly in cultures around the globe. They are also extremely prevalent, showing up in virtually all cultures. Much like religion, magic can be very difficult to define, particularly when asking whether or not it is even real to begin with. Broadly speaking, we can adopt our definition of power from our concept of magic. We have defined power as the ability to bring change about through action or influence. We can think of magic as the ability to bring about change through supernatural action or supernatural influence. How the supernatural power is used or wielded varies drastically among the different cultures, but power is a primary topic. Many anthropologists have studied magic over the years, and we'll look at it through a few prominent examples of that. So, Sir E. Evans Pritchard um, wrote a book called Rethinking the Logic of Magic. We looked several times at the work of Evans Pritchard among the Noor and Sudan, but this time we want to look at his work with the Central African culture group of the Azande. After his time with the Azande, Evans Pritchard published his ethnography, Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic among the Azande. And his ethnography, he sought to overturn Western concepts of magic and witchcraft. That is, he sought to overturn the idea that magic was an irrational practiced by simple-minded natives. He argued instead that magic and witchcraft only appear inconstant and irrational when they are arranged like museum objects on a shelf, examined outside the context of daily life. He was critiquing Westerners who dismiss a cultural tradition as irrational without truly understanding the tradition. So what he found was that among the Azande, witchcraft was a central element of their daily life. Virtually all misfortune that had happened in a life were traced back to witchcraft. If you were ill, it was caused by witchcraft. If someone died, it was caused by witchcraft. So interestingly, witchcraft could also be caused by people without knowing it. Witchcraft was considered to be inherited from a parent who could be carried out unconsciously. In this way, witchcraft was more akin to modern day Westerners might call psychic powers. No spell or incantation need to be involved. Witches are both male and female and could simply will things to happen. Thus, witchcraft was found throughout daily life. Again, all misfortune was found by it. And many people could be perpetrating it without even knowing it. Magic, on the other hand, was a deliberate act among the Azande. Magic was consciously performed through incantations and spells and by trained witch doctors. The witch doctor's primary purpose was to counteract the misfortune created by witchcraft. Using their magic, witch doctors would attempt to identify sources of misfortune and then ask people to stop performing witchcraft. So it was kind of a cornerstone, groundbreaking idea that these were not simple people. Okay, Paul Stoller studied sorcerer and magic in Africa. So we'll turn to his ethnography in the sorcerer's shadow. So his work is unusual in that he was fully initiated as a sorcerer, living among the people in Nigeria. After spending time in local communities, Stoller was able to be taken on as an apprentice to a local sorcerer. As part of his experience, he lived life of a traditional magic practitioner. He had to memorize incantations, he had to eat special foods, he ingested powers and wore more magical objects for protection, In short, he took the concept of participate observation to the fullest extent. So he reported incidents that are somewhat more difficult to understand, as he claimed indirect participation in an attack of sorcery that resulted in temporary paralysis of a victim. So, yeah. It is not our place to judge a religion or an act of magic as real or unreal, but instead to understand that is real to the person who experiences it. So that's Paul Stoller. So baseball magic. I think I'm going to skip this, but basically he's just talking about superstitions, and we all do superstitions, especially anyone who plays a sport of any sort. You have your lucky shirt or lucky socks or whatever, and that's what it's talking about. So power is negotiated throughout all cultural systems, and perhaps even more within religious systems. Religion is also a system that provides explicit meaning to many people in their daily lives. We have to balance our understanding of religion between its meaning and its uses as a system of power. So, Clifford Geertz explored the role of symbols in religion. Essentially, Geertz argued that religious symbols carried deep levels of meaning that helped to create reality for the religious practitioners. The interaction with religious symbols on a regular basis reminds the believer that the reality of their religion, thus belief and meaning, are constantly reinforced and created. While symbols are prevalent throughout culture, Geertz argued that even more common within religion and had greater levels of meaning. Take example, the ritual of communion within Christianity. The act of eating bread and drinking wine carries an incredibly deep meaning for most Christians. The objects themselves symbolize the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Thus, they symbolize the divine. But more than that, the bread and wine represent the sacrifice made by Jesus Christ when he allowed himself to be crucified by the Romans. For Christians, this is an incredibly powerful act, whereby the prophet and the divine Son of God offer himself as a sacrifice for the benefit of all humanity. Imagine you knew nothing about Christianity, though, and you saw someone eating bread and drinking wine. Would you even think twice about it? Could you imagine that such a simple act would have such deep significance? For Geertz, the meaning of these symbols, as well as the symbolic act, created the cultural system of religion. Religion and power. So, Assad is another anthropologist. He objects to Geertz's explanation of religion, as he said that that we simply accept symbols as imbued with meaning, but he asks, where does that meaning come from and how is it established? Or as he terms it, what was the authorizing process that gave the symbol meaning? Assad argues that meaning behind religious symbols were produced through a complex historical process through which the meanings were created, contested, and maintained. In other words, processes that were rife with power and contention. Assad also cautioned against Western scholars taking too narrow a view on religion. He was concerned with the preconception and cultural backgrounds of anthropologists would mislead them in their study of religion in other cultures. For this reason, he argued against using any universal definitions for religion. He suggested that such definitions would only limit an anthropologist's ability to conceive and understand religion. He also said that it was very important to always remember the dynamics of both power and meaning when approaching religion. Whether or not we share a belief in the meaning behind religion, it's believers do, and that's what makes the experience real for them. So now let's turn to an example of meaning and power and how it can be entwined within religion. So, religion and revolution in Mexico. So, this happened in the 1990s in Chiapas, Mexico. The people living in the state of Chiapas are among the poorest of all Mexican. However, the state set up an abundance of natural resources, including oil, gas, and hydraulic power. Unfortunately, a majority of the profits from the industry leave the state. Fed up with the repressive economic conditions, a group of local residents led a coordinating march in 4 cities throughout the state in January 1994. This group became known as the Zapatas. They advocated for economic equality for the people, and the government quickly blamed Samuel Ruiz Garcia, a cardinal of the Catholic Church, for this movement. This was an extraordinary step, since even today approximately 90% of all Mexicans classify themselves as Catholics. Publicly blaming a Catholic cardinal was a dangerous thing for the government to do in a country where the church is so widely supported. Indeed, the Zapatas movement continued for many more years after the initial protest, despite the government's attempt to crack down on it. We might ask, though, why did the government blame the cardinal? Where was the truth in the exchange? In 1959, Pope John the 23rd called for the Vatican Council to modernize the Catholic Church. This was a major event for the Catholic Church. The council became colloquially known as the Vatican II, as it was the second Vatican Council that had ever been called in the Church's nearly 2,000-year history. The council called for many radical changes, including the abolishment of Latin Mass in favor of Mass being performed within local languages. There's still Latin Masses that are performed. In general, these reforms were aimed at making the church more friendly to its parishioners and improving the church's involvement with daily lives, rather than simply expecting them to attend church once a week. So, having absorbed the lessons of Vatican II, Cardinal Ruiz Garcia returned to Chiapas and began to work to implement these message of openness and interest in supporting the people. So that's why the state went against him. So he was very successful in helping to organize things and get the church to be more modern. His politics did build community interest in issue of social justice that spurred the revolution, so he was only partly to blame for it. So, how's globalization changing religion? With the increase in globalization, we have seen increased contact between people of different faiths. Thus, people have increased awareness of existence of other religions. The force of time-space compression, uneven development, and conflicts between nation states all affect religions around the world. So since you guys are not here, we're not going to do that part. I can't seem to go back, but I would go ahead and look at these beautiful questions because you will see them again. So, as I've said before, make sure that you're writing 2 questions on the form and answering your peers' questions. And I hope you stay healthy and are doing okay. I will talk to you all later. Goodbye. So,